Hello and welcome back to the No More Trauma podcast. I am your host. My name is Tanya, certified trauma-informed yoga teacher, student, yoga therapist, and wellness facilitator. Hi. My mission is to provide healing, mental health tips, and inspiration for living a trauma-free lifestyle. You can find this podcast on Apple, SoundCloud, and on YouTube. The purpose of this podcast is to enlighten with all of the information as I travel through on my journey. I also want to advise that the information I offer on this podcast is based on my life as a student and teaching experience as a certified coach, yoga and wellness professional. The information shared does not substitute or replace any medical or holistic services you may or may not be receiving. So let's begin. In today's episode, we'll be talking about exploring the connection between trauma and yoga. Ooh, it's going to be good. I invite you to reach for water if you need it, enjoy a latte, or reach for a cozy blanket or a pillow and get comfortable. I also invite you to just observe any sensations that may come up anytime you hear a certain word or if a memory starts to pop up as you hear some of the words used in this podcast. Just take care of you while you're tuned in. So, in this exploring the connection between trauma and yoga, the idea is for me to help you understand trauma and yoga's potential in healing. So, this will also provide context and a recap of some of the information you may already know. So let's talk about trauma. What is it? If you're, just tuning in, it's your first time on the podcast, let's talk about it a bit. So trauma can be classified in acute, chronic, and complex trauma. Okay. And so the acute can be a single life-altering event. And you also have the chronic trauma, which really relates to a repeated exposure to a high-stressed event or violence or abuse. And then we have the complex trauma, which results in exposure to multiple and just varied traumatic experiences over time, and in turn can disrupt someone's ability, their developmental ability and sense of self. I also have a podcast of Trauma 101 and the fight, flight, freeze response. I will put those in the show notes below should you wish to dive deeper into the topic of trauma itself. Okay, so this can range from any sort of personal loss to a community level trauma. Okay, and so what are the impacts? If we look at the impacts of trauma, we look at the physical impact. This can lead to chronic pain, tension, illness, right? So when we think about fibromyalgia, think about, bursitis, pain in the knees, shoulder pain, okay? So the trauma can also show up for us physically, right? Even I also invite you to consider the organs. The organs can also hold our trauma and look like physical sensations of manifestations of constipation. This can also look like, heart palpitations, And so that also goes into that mental and emotional piece of trauma, which looks like anxiety, right? And so maybe you're starting to feel nervous anytime your phone rings, or maybe you're starting to feel nervous and anxious anytime you walk into work, right? Not feeling safe in the workplace. Maybe this can be, this can also manifest as depression, right? Feeling really heavy in the mind space, really heavy and down, emotionally. Post-traumatic stress disorder, having PTSD flare-ups, right? That can look like being really hypervigilant, really on high alert. This can also look like, manifestations of, say, outbursts, right? Or crying spells. Okay. So that's what trauma can look like physically as well as mentally and emotionally. It can also, if we think about the social experience, it can also translate or look like isolation. Maybe finding yourself, when we think about, immediately when I think about isolation, I think about 2020, the year of 2020, and feeling isolated in your home, feeling restricted in your connections, your social interactions, can also look like difficulty relationships, right? So difficulty with your intimate relationships, whether that be platonic or intimate partnerships. There can be challenges in that aspect of social interaction. So once we have this understanding of trauma, right, and the different levels of trauma, the acute, the chronic, and complex trauma, right, and how they can, manifest and look like and appear in life, and how it can manifest in the body physically, mentally, emotionally, and how we respond to it, then we start to look into the mind-body connection of trauma. Okay. So the mind-body connection of trauma, and what that looks like is how trauma is actually stored in the body, right? And so, as I mentioned before, trauma can sit in the organs, right? We start to experience, say, issues with our kidneys, issues with our, say, you may experience like gallstones, gallbladder challenges. And so we start to introduce somatic memory and the nervous system. And so we're looking at the mind-body connection in trauma. And we'll also start to look at the mind-body connection that yoga offers, okay? So if we stay on the topic of trauma, the role of the ANS, that's the autonomic nervous system. This is the place that controls our fight, flight, freeze, and fawn responses. Again, I have another episode talking about the trauma responses, and I'll list that below. And so what happens is there's this dysregulating of this body, of this system, and it impacts our well-being, right? This is how we experience it. We experience flare-ups within our organs, right? And so that mind-body connection. So yoga, what happens is yoga starts to help us build a different relationship with our body. Okay. It addresses these somatic aspects of trauma and really help us reconnect with our body. So when trauma happens, and this, let's take the I'd like to say that flight response or that freeze response. And what happens, there's this detachment that we have to our body, or this aversion we have to our body and the sensations that may come up when we're stimulated and activated. And that may be through memory, through flashback, through words, through nonverbal cues, or physical interaction. And so what yoga does is it begins to introduce this gentle and safe way to rebuild this connection back to our body. And the use of pranayama is also known as breath work, and mindfulness helps us create a sense of calm in the autonomic nervous system, that ANS. And so again, it reduces this hyperarousal and promotes homeostasis, a sense of calm. And so what yoga does, and as research shares, yoga actually produces this new chemical in the body that helps the body move from a very high stress state into a more relaxed state, a state that feels more safe. So diving deeper into this mind-body connection, we talk about the body. What about the mind? And so the neuroplasticity, also known as plasticity. And so what yoga does, again, like I mentioned before, is it creates this ability to reconnect with the body in different ways, physically, to the sensations, but it also does that in the brain. The neural pathways begin to shift and change. That way, it builds this sense of awareness, emotional regulation, which is actually really essential and vital for trauma survivors, because that area of the brain is affected even more. So when we, again, look at neuroplasticity, say, Tanya, I'm a little uncertain. I want to break it down just a little bit more. So when we look at neuroplasticity, these are the neural networks within the brain. And what it does is it changes and grows based off of our lived experiences. And it helps us, and it shifts and grow when we're learning and adapting to new skills and life experiences and changes, but also when recovering from trauma experiences, injuries. Let's also look at the, again, PTSD, right? So as I mentioned before, with PTSD, like those PTSD flare-ups, intrusive thoughts or flashbacks that may come up. And so evidence actually suggests that yoga-based interventions such as meditation, breath work or pranayama, asana, which is the physical act of yoga, actually alleviates the sensations of depression, anxiety, fear, those fear-based thoughts. And then there's the holistic healing piece. So unlike traditional therapies that may focus solely on like the cognitive aspects of healing, yoga looks at looks at the mind and the body, bringing, really piecing everything together. So utilizing breath control, utilizing mindfulness, self-awareness, where we get to turn within. That's my favorite part. So how does it really affect, how do we get to this place of trauma recovery? How does yoga support trauma recovery? Because that's my mission, right? And so, what I've found in my very own experience as a student is that, again, building this different relationship with my body, knowing when I'm out in the world and when I'm, you know, maybe stimulated by a conversation or stimulated by something I see out in front of me, I am able to go within and see what's populating for me, what's coming up. Like for an example, there was a moment, hmm, trying to think here. Okay, trying to see what example I'm going to use. What example I'm going to use. So there was a moment where I was out in the world, out in the world, and here's a really, really good one. This one was recent. And so there was a moment where I was out in the world, and there was a woman who is very upset, very irate, obviously triggered in her experience. And she was yelling, she was screaming at another person. And, the shouting, that was something that I didn't feel calm in. I didn't feel calm in my outside environment. And so I had to check within. And what I noticed is that a habit or pattern of mine is to clench my stomach, right? And there's another, I believe I have an episode, if you visit the No More Trauma virtual studio, my YouTube channel, feel free to subscribe to the channel. I do have a yoga practice for IBS, or irritable bowel syndrome, or Crohn's disease, which is linked to, individuals suffering trauma that has like really high anxiety. So anyway, coming back, I was noticing that I was clenching my stomach and I was feeling just very alarmed. And so what I always suggest is, finding what are your anchoring, I like to say your emergency exits. How do I ground? How do I come back to this present moment, reminding myself that I'm safe and where I can unclench my stomach? Because this can also lead to constipation, or what some may say like travel constipation. And so I had to remind myself that I was safe, but I had to hum, right? I started humming. And so humming, because the brain begins to focus on the sound, that vibration of the hum, you start to notice that physical sensation and brings you back to the present moment. And I was able to ground in that humming, right? So closing my eyes and go back, and I was able to gently relax my stomach. I was no longer clenching my abdomen, right? So in this recovery, anytime I feel stimulated now, I can remind myself, okay, you're in this place, in this moment. This doesn't impact you, but you can breathe now. See if you can inhale and exhale and notice your breath. See if you can soften through the abdomen, unclench. You're okay, right? Reminding yourself that you're safe, you're grounded. And so this mindfulness, which is introduced with yogic practices, brings this level of awareness, right? The internal signals in the body, that interoception, what's happening internally. And matter of fact, I have something to read here from the book by Dr. Richard Hanson, The Practical Neuroscience of Buddha Brain, Happiness, Love, and Wisdom. And on page 144, underneath Be Mindful of Your Inner World, it states, in essence, mindful attention to your own experiences activates many of the same circuits that are stimulated in childhood by the attuned and caring attention of others. Thus, you're giving to yourself here and now what you should have gotten when you were little. Over time, this interest and concern will gradually sink in, helping you to feel more secure while being close with others, right? So I had to check in with myself and notice what was happening. So the benefits of yoga and how it supports this recovery is we begin to calm the nervous system, right? And cultivate this sense of safety and mindfulness. And it encourages the reconnection with the body after a dissociation, right? So when I talk about, in that story, there was also this dissociating. I started, clenching, and I wasn't noticing that I was clenching due to the high pitch volume that was coming from the person away from me. I was so attuned to that I was dissociated for a moment in my body. And so I had to come back and remind myself, oh, okay, unclench, come back. You're safe now. You're okay. And so yoga does just that. When we step on the mat, whether it be stepping on the mat in your home, stepping on the mat in a yoga studio, stepping on the mat in a rehabilitation space, stepping on the mat in a senior home or facility, stepping on the mat in the prison system, stepping on the mat in a school, stepping on the mat in a corporate wellness event, stepping on the mat in a retreat space, stepping on the mats in a yoga therapy space, wherever you are and you step on the mat, you begin to build this reconnection to your body, and you build a different conversation with your body, listening to your internal sensations, feeling the external sensations, learning the relationship of your emotion with the chakra body and the organs in which it houses. And you have the ability to learn what is balance and what is out of balance. The narrative that may be attached to the imbalanced. And maybe beginning to go just a little bit deeper and finding out the roots of that, exploring the opposite of that. And being able to purge out the things that are no longer needed or outdated, and accepting what is, right? The true wholeness of who you are, the essence of your soul, embracing the light and the dark, the yin and the yang, the dukkha and the sukha of who you are, the santosha, the contentment, and the beauty of the threads that make up who you are at your truest, purest, most vibrant self, because you are not your trauma. The practice of yoga has so many beautiful benefits to reconnect to your physical and emotional and spiritual, intellectual self. I invite you to step on the mat if you've never stepped on it before and you're hearing all this buzz about it. Welcome. Welcome to the community. And if you already practice and you're a longtime student or a teacher or a yoga therapist, I invite you to explore the essences. Is essences a word? The threads of who you are, and to continue advocating just how amazing this practice is and how you can continue the journey and others can continue the journey of trauma recovery. It's such a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful practice. Now, I will say that not every yoga studio may be built for you, right? Not every yoga teacher is built for you. Not every yoga practice is built for you. So I invite you to explore what those are and to stay tuned for the next episode where we talk about the green flags of a good yoga practice and yoga studio or yoga therapist if you like to practice remote. Questions, comments, feedback about this episode, please put those down in the show notes and in the comments. Let's start a conversation. If you like this episode, please feel free to like it or give it the stars or the ratings that it deserves. And if you know someone who will benefit from this episode, feel free to share it. I would love for them to get the information that's shared in this episode and on the podcast in general. Well, I thank you so much for listening and tuning in. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes as mentioned, and other episodes that I mentioned in throughout this episode. You may find those linked in the show notes. So if you like more of what I have coming up, feel free to follow me in the No More Trauma Virtual Yoga Studio on YouTube. I am trying to get monetized, and I would love for you to subscribe. So remember to live abundantly, love your authenticity, and radiate organic happiness. But most importantly, live a life of no more trauma. Be well. Speak soon. Bye.